How's it going, everyone? Yosef back here with another video, and I hope you're having an amazing week so far. Today we are not doing a car review, but I did want to do a quick check-in with you now that I've had my Golf R for a year and a half, because you might be interested in the brand new Mark 8.5, the 2025 version of the Golf R, or you may be interested in getting a used one of these, and you're probably asking yourself, is it worth it? So today we are going to answer that question. I'm going to tell you my experiences with this car, the things that have gone wrong, how much it's cost me to own so far, and a few other things that maybe I didn't cover yet in some of the other videos. So hang tight, and if you're new to the channel, thank you so much for tuning in. My name is Yosef. I am a car enthusiast with 3 kids, and I used to sell cars before. So if you're interested in my perspective about cars, please consider subscribing. With that, let's go. All right, so I wanted to start off with the idea of a honeymoon period. Now, if you think about it, whenever you buy something new, you're always excited when you first get it because it's so cool, it's fresh, it's new technology, it's a new car, it's exciting. But after a period of time, that honeymoon phase sort of fizzles out, right? You're not as excited for it every time. It just becomes normal. It's part of your day-to-day life. And, you know, does that happen with a car? And with the Golf R, I have to say it's been an interesting journey because it hasn't been perfect, but I was always cautious going into it. When I was looking for the Golf R, I was thinking, I don't know, should I buy a Volkswagen product? Should I buy a Japanese product? Should I buy something that maybe is more reliable? Usually when people think about German cars, they think about horrible reliability stories and super expensive maintenance costs and things like that. And that was a real concern of mine. I was genuinely concerned about whether this is a good purchase or not. And now that I've owned the car for a year and a half, I think I can answer part of that question. Now, I've only had it for a year and a half, so I can't tell you what it's going to be like 5, 6, 7, 10 years down the road. I'm sure things will get more expensive and there will be more problems, but for that, I have a very good warranty. But for now, I was curious, when I buy the car, will I have a lot of issues with it? Will it leave me stranded? Will there be things that will just be so infuriating that will I regret having bought the car, or should I have bought something else? And so I wanted to touch on that first, because if you take a look at some of the competitors, you've got a Civic Type R, you've got a GR Corolla, you've got some other brands that have interesting and exciting cars too, but most critically, every car company has had recalls. Every car company, especially in recent years, have had their challenges. They've had production issues, they've had quality issues, they've got things that go wrong. And so with Volkswagen, it's been no different. However, I haven't had as many issues as you might think. I was reading a lot online at the forums and saw so many people have had travel assist errors and have had steering wheels replaced and a lot of other challenges. But to be honest with you, I've only had a few, and I have all the paperwork with me so I can talk a little bit more about that. So there's a few things we're going to cover today. Today I wanted to cover fuel economy, I wanted to cover my insurance costs, I want to cover some of the things that have gone wrong, whether it was my doing or something that was just wrong with the car, how many service things I've gone through in the last year and a half, and how much it costs to get a typical oil change. So you will get a good understanding of whether it's something that you want to get into or not. And just a word of caution, everyone's going to have a little bit of a different experience because I am here in Canada, in Toronto, Ontario, and so the costs may be a little bit different here than they will be even in a different province or somewhere else in the United States or anywhere else in the world where you may be watching. And so that is just a word of caution. Take everything that I'm saying with a grain of salt because your situation may be a little bit different. Now, before I tell you the things that have gone wrong, I just wanted to mention the car has held up really nicely over the last year and a half. I mean, take a look at the steering wheel. It still looks brand new. It's still got that matte finish and looks really nice. The seats are still beautiful. No damage, no weird things that have gone wrong with them. They've held up really well. And to be honest with you, that's been my experience. Even when I was waiting for my car, I was taking a look at a couple used ones and they always looked like they had held up pretty well. And it's interesting because I've got 3 kids, and to be honest with you, my kids don't take as good care of the car in the back seat area as I would hope. But even still, apart from the fact that it's dirty, it still looks pretty fresh and pretty new. And so that is one thing that I was really impressed with over the last year and a half. The car has done pretty well. All right, so let's start off by talking about the overall cost of ownership of this car. Now, it hasn't been as bad as I would have expected. I thought when I bought the car, the insurance rate was going to be insane. It was going to cost me a lot in gas. I was going to have all these added expenses that I really didn't want. So overall, I've been pleasantly surprised with the fact that it hasn't been as expensive as I had initially anticipated. So overall insurance costs, we'll start with that one as number one. So it cost me about $2,000 a year to insure this car in Canadian dollars. So I know if you're looking at this in the States, probably about $5 US. I'm kidding. It really wasn't as bad as I expected. Now, I do have a few things that are contributing to the fact that that price is relatively low. I have two cars. I live in Toronto, and the company that I work for has a really good deal with the insurance company, so it helps save me a considerable amount of money. Now, for those of you that don't have those types of deals, it might be a lot more expensive, but I was surprised that it wasn't a lot more expensive, even when I got the quotes from other companies that didn't have that relationship with the company that I work for. It wasn't as bad as I expected, and the difference between the GTI and the Golf R wasn't tremendously huge, and for that I was really happy because I was debating should I go down a step to get a GTI just because of that cost, and it wasn't terrible. So that was something I was impressed with. In terms of fuel economy, now that is one thing that I found to be interesting as well, because I thought it was going to be absolutely horrendous. I mean, it's a 2-liter turbocharged engine, so it doesn't sound very large, but with a 315 horsepower and my likeliness to drive it a little quicker and more aggressively, I thought it was going to be pretty bad. But I've averaged over the last year and a half about 11.2 liters per 100 kilometers, which is not amazing by any stretch. It's not a hybrid, it's not an electric car. I'm not getting great fuel economy, but it's not as bad as I expected. So that was something that I was very interested in. And you may want to take into account the fact that most of the trips that I take happen to be very short trips, and they also typically are just around the corner and bumper to bumper traffic. I'm not driving a lot on the highway. So in theory, if I was doing a lot of mixed driving, that number would be a lot lower. I'd probably be at around 10 or 9.8, something like that. And so that in my mind is actually a pretty good range. All right, so you're probably wondering, Yosef, how much does it cost to get a service done at Volkswagen for the Golf R? And that's a great question. Now, remember, I've only had the car for a year and a half, so I've only had to do one service so far, and that was for an oil change. Now, the oil change cost me $210, which includes taxes and everything else, and I thought that was pretty reasonable because if you think about it, the average car, most normal cars, they have to get 2 oil changes done per year, and the average oil change is probably around $130 to $140 plus tax. And if you think about it, those 2 oil changes after the end of the year would cost about $260, $280. So I feel like I'm a bit ahead with the Golf R, only having had to pay $210 once. Now, most car enthusiasts will probably say, well, you got to change your oil a little bit more frequently than that. So, you know, it may cost you a little bit more, but $210 for an oil change once a year, not terrible. Now, I haven't had to do a whole lot in terms of other maintenance or servicing because, again, the car is only a year and a half old and I haven't gone through brakes or any other major components. So take that for what it's worth, but I was surprised to know $210, not terrible for an oil change. All right, so at this point, you're probably thinking, Yosef, well, that's not too bad. It's only cost you $2,000 a year for insurance, only about $210 for an oil change, and whatever it costs you in gas. That's not terrible. Sign me up. Well, I have to share with you all the other things that have gone wrong with the car. So I have my trusty folder over here with all of the good stuff that I've done, and I keep a good record of every piece of maintenance that I've done. And I've counted, I have gone in for service 7 times so far in the year and a half that I've owned the car. And let me explain to you what all those things were that have gone wrong. Some of them were self-inflicted, some of them were just causes of nature, some of them were challenges that have happened when I picked up the car and were manufacturer defects. So let's talk about them and I'll list them and then we'll go through all the details. So the first thing that has gone wrong with the Golf R is when I picked up the car from the factory, I noticed that the bumper was not aligned perfectly. There was a little gap, and I shouldn't say little, it was a relatively large gap between the headlight on the passenger side of the car and the bumper. There was this nice big gap and it really bothered me. So I took it back in and I had them readjust the bumper. Wasn't a big deal, but again, that was a frustration that I had. And then I noticed that there was a little piece of plastic in the headlight, in the passenger side front headlight, that was just roaming around there. And every time I drove around, it would bounce around and move a little bit. And I thought that was really frustrating because it's a brand new car. Why is there a little piece of plastic hanging out in there? And so I took it to the dealer. They told me, unfortunately, there's nothing they can do because the headlight is perfectly functional. There's no real defect other than something that was just floating around in there. So that was infuriating, and I wish I could have gotten that fixed, but unfortunately, they weren't able to. So that's something I have to live with. Again, a manufacturer's defect. The next thing that I had an issue with was with one of the tires. I had a puncture in one of my brand new performance summer tires that came with the car that I had only driven for about 2 months with before I switched to the winters. And that was really frustrating. I had a nail in it, and again, there was nothing I could have done about that. It just happened to be there. And so I had to get that fixed. I took it into the dealer. They plugged it for me. All was well. So that was number 3. And then I had an issue with the infotainment system. It went crazy. I don't know what happened with it, but for some reason, it just went nuts. And there was an issue with it. It kept calling the roadside assistance, and all the screens were flashing, and it unlocked and locked my doors. Did some really crazy stuff. So I took it in again for service, and they took a look at that and they realized there's something wrong with it. And then my sunroof didn't open or close. And I opened it one day and I couldn't close it for a couple days. Thank God I have a garage that I could put it in. I didn't have to worry about it getting rained on. But to this day, I'm still paranoid about opening the sunroof, because what if it doesn't close again? So I took it in again for service, and they did a software update. They fixed sort of the electronics that were going a little haywire on the screen and the buttons and stuff like that. And then they replaced the whole sunroof head unit that also includes all of the dome lights on the interior. Those were also not functioning properly. So all of that was replaced under warranty, and now everything seems to be working fine. So that was service number 5. And then I ran into another issue, which was very, very frustrating. And that was that I had an engine warning light come on. Now, that was something that I wasn't expecting. It's a brand new car. Why would the engine warning light come on? And well, let me take a look at this and just tell you exactly what it was. So there was an intake. There was a little valve in the intake that had an issue. And so they had to take out the intake manifold. They had to replace that one little valve and some gaskets, and then they cleaned the air filter. So all of that was another service. That was service number 6. And then service number 7 was just the oil change. I went in for a general oil change and made sure that everything was topped up. That was it. So in total, 7 visits to Volkswagen to get things fixed over the course of a year and a half that I've owned this car. So now you're probably thinking yourself, well, that's a lot. Why would I want to get into a car that's been so intensive to own? It's had so many issues. And well, you have to remember, this is still a relatively early car for the generation. 2023, the car only came out in 2022, and so there weren't a lot of generations of the same car to go and deal with all these quirks and challenges, and I knew that going into it. So I knew there would be a honeymoon phase where I'd really get super excited and love the car and enjoy it, and then it would end because things would go wrong and I'd have to deal with the reality of owning a relatively early generation of a brand new car. So anyone going out and getting the newer versions of it, I think will probably not have to deal with a lot of those challenges, because most of that stuff would have been fixed in the later production years of the car. And especially now with the refresh, you've got a new infotainment system that's been tried and tested with the Volkswagen ID4 and some other cool stuff that has come with those. So a lot of those annoyances probably will not happen to you. So the big question now is it worth it? Well, to find out, we're gonna go for a little drive and I'm gonna sum up my thoughts. Okay, so was it worth it? And I think that's the big question that a lot of people have. Now, I've talked to people at the dealer, I've seen a lot of people on the forums, and some people have said, I've had enough, I don't want it anymore, it's frustrating, and they end up selling their Golf R. Now, I have not had that sense of frustration, because for me, I think this car is worth it. I also may be in a bit of a different situation than some people, because this is not my only car. I have another vehicle, and I've also learned over the years of owning different cars that, well, every car has its challenges, and I've had cars with many, many more frustrations than this. And to have a car that does so many things so well, but also doesn't have a tremendous amount of issues, well, that's a big blessing, because I've never had a car that's this fun, that, you know, has 315 horsepower and all-wheel drive and a lot of torque and sounds pretty great and looks really cool, and I can take the kids out with, and I can do my photography gigs with, and I can really enjoy. So for me, it's worth putting up with some of those headaches, and every person, I think, has to make their own determination at what point is it too much? At what point is it too expensive or too frustrating or just generally not something that you want to have to deal with? And that's going to be different for everybody. But for me, I haven't reached that point. The car has been relatively reliable. Those are a few things that have happened, again, relatively early on in my ownership. And so far since then, I haven't had to worry about anything. I've, knock on wood, haven't had any issues with the car, and I truly, truly love it. I even want to, modify it and do some other cool things to it, but it's generally been a very solid ownership experience. And so for me, that is something that I really appreciate. I know there will probably be issues later on, but again, I've got a pretty good warranty, so I don't feel so nervous about that. And I've gone into it with eyes wide open. I know what some of the challenges generally are for these types of cars, and I'm okay with that. So everybody, again, has to make their own determination around what they're willing to put up with and what they aren't. So was the car worth it? Absolutely. Was it frustrating that I had to put up with some things? Absolutely. But would I sell it and get something else? No. The answer is absolutely not. I've gone through, in my mind, probably 100 times, what else is out there? What would I have bought if I didn't have this car? What would I be interested in if I could change it up tomorrow? And I could, if I really wanted to, I could always sell it and look for something else, but nothing jumps out at me. There's nothing that I'm like, oh, I wish I had that instead of this. And when I was talking to somebody at the dealership, he told me, a lot of people were trading them in and getting the Integra Type S's. And I was like, well, that's interesting, but I don't know. I'd have to be giving up on one seat in my car for the Integra Type S. It only has 4 seats, and give up on the all-wheel drive, and that's a front-wheel drive car. So, you know what? Overall, I am really happy with the Golf R. I think it's an awesome car. It's a lot of fun. It's still very cool. And to be honest with you, for the price that you pay and the level of performance and practicality and all the other good stuff that comes with the car, if you have to deal with a few infotainment issues and you have to deal with a few other small challenges, those are things that I'm willing to put up with. So in short, the car is absolutely worth it, and I would definitely encourage people to go out and buy it. It's something that you'll probably really enjoy for many years to come. So thank you so much for watching the video. I really appreciate it, and I hope that you found this video helpful. And if you have, go feel free to take a look at some of the other content I made about the Golf R, and I will see you again in the next video.